This is Eddie Brumley, and this is Isaiah in 5 minutes, part 3.
So in the next couple of videos, we're going to talk about the big idea of Isaiah. We're going to divide Isaiah into two halves. We're going to look first at Isaiah chapters 1 through 39. And then in our second video, we will look at Isaiah 40 through 66. The whole book really is a contrast between God's warning of judgment and God's words of hope and redemption for the people of Israel. See, God is warning them about the dangers of breaking covenant with Him as they begin to move towards idolatry, wickedness, injustice, political corruption. And for example, I want you to understand that idolatry is more than just God being jealous or upset that they are worshiping something other than Him. We tend to become like that which we worship. And the problem with idols, whether they be radical nationalism or radical individualism or power or money or sex or whatever, is that when we worship the wrong thing, we begin to take on its characteristics. In fact, we become like what we worship. And when we worship something other than the living God, it begins to distort us. Now, the results of that distortion may not be seen for several generations. But as a culture begins to center on something other than God, it begins to shift the weight of the structure of society. It begins to distort the human community, and things begin to move in the wrong direction, leading to deterioration and to destruction. It is helpful to think of the book of Isaiah as two halves. The first half of Isaiah is focusing on the coming calamity as Israel is making itself vulnerable to invasion by the Assyrian Empire and invasion by the Babylonian Empire. And so chapters 1 through 39 have a lot to do with warning God's people about that. Chapters 40 through 66 have to do with God's redemptive purposes through and even past the exile, although in both 1 through 39, you have visions of hope, and in chapters 40 through 66, you have glimpses of words of judgment. So it is not perfectly clear-cut, though there are distinctive messages in the two halves of the book. In chapters 1 through 39, we will talk about first chapters 1 through 12, which talk about how Israel, or rather Judah, breaking covenant with God, is leaving them vulnerable to the dangers that are encroaching upon them in the forms of the Assyrian and Babylonian Empire. God warns through the prophet Isaiah that Judah will end up coming into calamity, that the exile will happen, and that it will be like a mighty forest fire which destroys the forest, leaving Israel burnt over and ruined. Yet out of all of this destruction, God will purify and redeem His people and bring about creative purposes and redemptive purposes even through the destruction of this fire. At the heart of this part of Isaiah is Isaiah's own encounter with God. As he's in the temple, he encounters the Lord. And encountering the Lord, he realizes that he is a sinful man who lives among sinful people, and that he's unable to be in the presence of God. He says, "Woe to me, for I am sinful. I'm a man of unclean lips and live among a people of unclean lips." It is then that an angel of the Lord comes and does something very interesting. He takes a coal of fire from the altar and places it upon Isaiah's lips. What we discover is just like the fire that first destroys but then enables new growth to happen from Judah, the fire that touches Isaiah's lips is not meant to harm him or to hurt him, but to instead purify him and to make him able to stand in the presence of God and to live in covenant with a holy God. Isaiah is then commissioned to become a prophet or a messenger to his people. He is to go to them. But paradoxically, the people will harden their hearts and not listen. In fact, they'll become even more stubborn and even more intent on pursuing the wickedness that is going to bring God's judgment. And they will become like a forest, destroyed and leveled. And the dynasty of David will become like a burnt over stump. Yet Isaiah is not to get discouraged nor lose hope, but is to put his trust in the wisdom and judgment of God. From out of this burnt stump will come the Messianic king, like new growth from old life. And he will become the redemptive king by which not only the line of David is restored, but the nation of Judah is restored, and all of the world is renewed. Chapters 13 through 27 have to do with a shift that is taking place on the international scene. The current threat to Judah is the Assyrian Empire. But Isaiah can see a time when the Babylonian Empire will be an even greater threat. It'll be even more arrogant and more puffed up, but that God will judge both the Assyrian Empire and the Babylonian Empire for their arrogance and their pride and bring them to ruin. Chapters 24 through 27 within this focus on all the other nations of the known world, in which God will also judge them for their arrogance and for their pride and for their stubbornness and injustice. But in the book of Isaiah, justice and judgment are never the final word. There is a word of hope for all the nations. Out of judgment, renewal and restoration will happen, and God will bring peace to all the nations of the world. Chapters 28 through 39 have to do with the rise and fall of Jerusalem. And they happen, and this story is told through the individual story of King Hezekiah. King Hezekiah is the king that in charge when the Assyrian Empire sieges the city of Jerusalem. Hezekiah comes and he falls before the Lord and humbles himself, and God miraculously frees the people from the military siege. Later, the same Hezekiah receives envoy from the Babylonian Empire. He entertains these diplomats by showing them all the wealth and all the splendor and all the secrets of the Judean Empire. When Isaiah finds out about this, he's irate and predicts that the same friends will someday represent the enemies of Judah, and that the same nation will return in vengeance to destroy Jerusalem. This in fact happens. It happens many generations later. But the friends, the Babylonian Empire, become the greatest enemy of the people of Judah. To understand this story, you need to know what happens before the Assyrians lay siege to Jerusalem. The threat is growing from the empire, and Judah, rather than seeking God's help, seeks the help of an ally, an old enemy, Egypt. The prophet Isaiah warns that relying on Egypt will turn out to be a foolish choice, and that this covenant with them will be worthless in the end. When Hezekiah finally has some relief from the siege of Assyria on Judah, he sees Babylon as another potential political ally. And rather than seeking his help in the Lord, he seeks to secure Judah's security by way of more political intrigues and more political alliances, this time through the Babylonians. And Isaiah, throughout all of the section, is saying to his people, trust me. Don't put your trust in money or power or military might or in political alliances. Put your trust in me. I'm Eddie Bromley. This is Isaiah in 5 minutes. And in the next section, we'll look at chapters 40 through 66.
If you like what you saw, please hit the like button and be sure to subscribe.